Over 2 centuries, the Aztecs built the most sophisticated murder machine in human history. They didn't just practice human sacrifice, they perfected it, industrialized it, turned it into spiritual technology. At their peak in 1487, they killed 80,000 people in 4 days. The blood-formed lakes, the skulls numbered in the hundreds of thousands. But gods can starve. In 1521, when Spanish conquistadors surrounded their capital, the Aztecs responded with the greatest feeding frenzy in history, killing thousands of their own people daily in desperate attempts to appease deities who had already fallen silent. They fed their civilization to their gods until nothing remained. An empire chose to devour itself rather than let their beautiful cruelty die. The gods are gone, but the echoes remain. The first murder, how the world learned to bleed. Before anything existed, 2 cosmic entities found a monster so vast it had mouths for joints and teeth for mountains. They didn't negotiate with it. They grabbed this creature while it was alive and literally tore it in half, using its screaming flesh to build the earth itself. But here's the twist that will haunt your dreams. The monster didn't die. It's still alive right now, beneath your feet, with every mouth still hungry and demanding to be fed with human blood. Every step you take is on living, conscious flesh that craves the taste of sacrifice. The Aztec creation story isn't a gentle tale of divine love bringing forth the world. It's a horror story where the universe begins with the gods literally tearing each other apart. And every beautiful thing that exists today is built from the screaming pieces of divine corpses. Picture 2 forces emerging from that blackness. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, and Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. These aren't wise creators. They're cosmic predators, and they're about to teach the universe its first lesson in sacred violence. The world begins when these 2 entities encounter the earth monster, Tlaloc. Picture something impossible, a creature so vast it fills the space between dimensions, with mouths at every joint, teeth like mountain ranges, and an appetite that can never be satisfied. It's alive, it's aware, and it's hungry for everything that has ever existed. Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl don't negotiate with the earth monster. They grab it with their divine hands, and they tear it apart. Literally. They rip its body in half while it's still alive, still screaming, still trying to devour them with its countless mouths. From the earth monster's mutilated body, they create the world. Its flesh becomes the soil. Its bones become the mountains. Its blood becomes the rivers and oceans. Its hair becomes the trees and grass. And its countless mouths, those remain open, always hungry, always demanding to be fed. But here's the crucial part. The earth monster doesn't die. It can't die. So every plant that grows is the earth monster eating. Every step you take is walking on its living flesh. Every breath you draw is breathing its exhalations. The world itself is a conscious, hungry entity that demands constant feeding. This is where humans enter the story. The gods create people not out of love, but out of necessity. Someone has to feed the earth monster. Someone has to pay the blood debt that keeps the world functioning. The first humans are made from the bones of previous creations, mixed with divine blood, and they come into existence already owing a debt that can only be paid with death. But the creation story gets worse. The gods realize that just creating the world isn't enough. They need to keep it running. The sun needs to move across the sky. The seasons need to change, the crops need to grow. And all of this requires constant sacrifice. 2 gods volunteer to become the sun by throwing themselves into a great fire. They both survive the burning and become suns. Now there are 2 suns in the sky, burning everything to ash. The other gods panic and realize one of the suns has to die. So they murder one of them. They take stones and rocks, and they beat one of the burning gods to death, then throw his corpse into the underworld. His death creates the moon, and from this moment forward, the universe operates on a simple principle. Things must die for other things to live. But even this isn't enough. The remaining sun god stands still in the sky, refusing to move unless he's fed. Not fed with prayers, fed with blood and hearts. The other gods realize what they have to do. They start killing each other one by one, cutting out their own hearts to feed the sun and get it moving across the sky. This is the template for everything that follows. The gods establish the cosmic law. Death creates life. Sacrifice enables existence. And the highest form of worship is murder. They literally write murder into the fundamental laws of physics. When humans finally appear in this blood-soaked cosmos, they're born into a universe where killing isn't just acceptable, it's mandatory. The earth monster beneath their feet is constantly hungry. The sun above their heads demands daily feeding. Every aspect of existence requires human sacrifice. The creation myth tells humans that they exist because the gods were willing to die for them. Therefore, humans must be willing to die for the gods. It's not cruelty, it's reciprocity. It's not murder, it's cosmic maintenance. Every Aztec child learned this story. They grew up understanding that the world they lived in was built from divine corpses, that their food grew from an eternally hungry monster, and that their purpose in life was to eventually feed that monster with their own blood. The art of heart extraction, sacred surgery at sunrise. Picture this. Aztec priests developed surgical techniques so precise they could cut a beating heart from a living chest in under 4 minutes, while keeping the victim conscious the entire time. Using obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical steel, they perfected the art of reaching through someone's ribcage, feeling around inside their chest cavity, and extracting their heart without killing them, because the gods could only be fed by hearts that were still pumping with life. Today we're witnessing the most sophisticated murder techniques ever developed, performed by doctors of death who spent decades learning exactly how to keep you awake while they stole your soul. At the top of the pyramid, the sacrifice stone waits. It's not flat like a table. It's curved upward, designed specifically to arch the victim's back and thrust the chest skyward, making the heart easily accessible. The stone is black with old blood that is soaked so deep it's become part of the rock itself. What you're about to see is the result of generations of religious refinement. This isn't butchery. It's surgery performed by masters who have spent their entire lives learning exactly how to keep a human being conscious and aware while their heart is cut out of their chest. The head priest approaches the victim with an obsidian blade. Obsidian, volcanic glass sharper than any surgical steel your modern world has ever created. These blades are so thin, they're almost invisible from the side. So sharp they can split a hair lengthwise. So perfect that modern surgeons use them for the most delicate operations. For priests grab the victim's limbs and stretch him across the sacrifice stone. The fifth priest takes his position beside the exposed chest. This priest has trained for decades to do what he's about to do. He knows exactly where to cut, how deep to go, and most importantly, how to do it while keeping the victim alive and conscious. The blade slides between the ribs, just below the breastbone. Not a wild stab, a precise incision made with surgical accuracy. The priest can feel the resistance of the cartilage, the slight pop as the blade pierces the pericardium, the sudden rush of warmth as blood begins to flow. Here's what makes this truly horrifying. The victim is still alive, still conscious, still aware of what's happening. The obsidian blade is so sharp that it cuts through tissue without triggering the massive trauma response that would cause immediate unconsciousness. The priest's hand disappears into the chest cavity, fingers probing between the ribs, feeling for the heart. He can feel it beating against his palm, frantic, desperate, pumping harder as the body realizes what's happening. The heart knows it's about to be stolen, and it fights with every beat. The priest has to cut the heart free without damaging it, without letting it stop beating, and without killing the victim too quickly. He severs the major arteries with precise cuts, his fingers working by touch inside the dark cavity of the chest, guided by years of practice and intimate knowledge of human anatomy. The heart comes free with a wet, sucking sound that carries across the plaza below. Steam rises from the priest's hands as the warm organ meets the cool morning air. But listen, it's still beating. Even removed from the body, held in the priest's bloody hands, the heart continues to pulse with the victim's final life force. The crowd below erupts in celebration as the priest holds the beating heart toward the rising sun. This is the moment of cosmic feeding, the heart, still warm, still alive, still carrying the victim's consciousness, being offered to the gods who demand this precise form of nourishment. The victim, impossibly, is still alive. His heart is gone, but his eyes are still open, still aware. The priests have become so skilled that they can keep a sacrifice conscious for minutes after the heart extraction. These final moments are considered the most sacred, when a victim can see their own heart being offered to the gods. The priest smears the warm blood across the lips of the god statue, feeding the divine image with the victim's life force. Other priests collect the flowing blood in bowls, because every drop is sacred, every bit of fluid needed for various rituals throughout the ceremony. Meanwhile, the body is thrown down the pyramid steps, where it will bounce and roll, leaving a trail of blood on each stone step. At the bottom, other priests are waiting to skin it, dismember it, and distribute the pieces for various purposes. This entire process takes about 4 minutes when performed by skilled priests. For minutes of conscious, surgical murder, performed with religious precision in front of cheering crowds who see this not as horror, but as the most beautiful act possible. And this happens every single day, multiple times. The Great Pyramid alone might see dozens of such sacrifices in a single morning, with different priests perfecting their techniques, competing to see who can extract a heart with the most precision, who can keep a victim conscious the longest. The Aztecs didn't stumble into this level of expertise. They developed it over centuries, passing down techniques from master to apprentice, refining their methods, experimenting with different approaches, all in service of achieving the perfect sacrifice. By the time the Spanish arrived, Aztec priests had achieved a level of surgical skill that wouldn't be matched in Europe for another 300 years. They could perform operations that modern emergency room doctors would struggle with. They had turned murder into the highest form of art. The Feast of Skins, 20 days wearing the dead. Every spring, Aztec priests would skin their sacrificial victims alive, peeling their flesh off like removing a tight sweater, and then wear these human suits for 20 days while they rotted. We're talking about religious leaders walking through crowded markets, wearing decomposing human faces around their necks, conducting sacred ceremonies while pieces of putrefied flesh fell from their bodies, and sleeping in beds while wrapped in the tightening, shrinking skin of people they'd tortured to death. This isn't metaphor. This is documented religious practice that turned human hide into holy clothing. You're standing in a ceremonial plaza as dawn breaks over a very different kind of sacrifice. Today, the priests aren't just going to kill their victims, they're going to wear them. The victim is brought forward to a special platform in the center of the plaza. He's been chosen carefully, young, strong, with perfect skin unmarked by scars or disease. For weeks, he's been pampered, fed the finest foods, bathed daily, and treated like royalty. Because his skin needs to be perfect for what's about to happen. The priests begin the ceremony not with a quick death, but with a slow one. This isn't about efficiently extracting a heart. This is about carefully removing the largest organ of a human body while keeping it intact and the victim conscious for as long as possible. The head priest approaches with a different kind of obsidian blade, broader, sharper, designed for precision cutting of skin. He spent years learning exactly how deep to cut to separate skin from muscle without damaging either layer. The victim is stretched across a wooden frame, arms and legs bound. The priest begins at the neck, making a careful incision that circles the throat like a collar. The skin parts under the obsidian edge with barely any resistance, revealing the pale muscle tissue beneath. Now the real artistry begins. The priest starts peeling the skin downward, like removing a tight-fitting garment. His fingers work between the skin and muscle, separating the connective tissue that holds them together. This requires incredible skill. Cut too deep, and you damage the skin. Too shallow, and you don't separate the layers properly. The victim is still alive, still conscious, still able to feel every inch of his skin being slowly stripped away. The priests have learned exactly how to do this without causing immediate death from shock or blood loss. As each section of skin is peeled away, the exposed muscle tissue gleams red and wet in the morning sunlight. The victim's nerves are screaming signals to a brain that can no longer process the magnitude of what's happening. But somehow, impossibly, he remains conscious through most of the process. The crowd watches in fascination as the priests work their way down the torso, carefully separating skin from chest, from arms, from abdomen. The goal is to remove the entire skin as a single piece, a human suit that can be worn by the priests afterward. When they reach the hands, the priests face their greatest challenge. Finger skin is delicate and tears easily, but the complete hand skin is essential for the ritual. They use the finest obsidian tools, working with the patience of surgeons. The victim usually dies when they start working on the abdomen, where major blood vessels can't be avoided. But by then, most of the usable skin has been removed. The priests continue working on the corpse, completing their grisly harvest. What emerges is a complete human skin, empty, limp, but intact. Arms, legs, torso, even the face, all connected in one piece like a grotesque costume. The priests treat this with religious reverence, carrying it to special preparation areas where it will be treated with salt and other preservatives. But the ceremony has only just begun. The real horror starts when the priests put on the skins. The high priest of Zeit, Totec, approaches the fresh skin and begins to put on like clothing. Arms through armholes, legs through leg holes, the victim's face becoming a loose mask hanging around the priest's neck. The skin is still warm, still carrying the heat of the person who wore it minutes before. For the next 20 days, this priest will wear the dead man's skin. He'll conduct ceremonies in it, walk through the city in it, eat meals while wearing it, sleep in it. The skin will gradually shrink and tighten around his body as it begins to dry and decay. As the days pass, the skin begins to change. First it turns pale, then yellow, then begins to smell. The priest wearing it can feel it tightening around his body as it dries, the facial skin around his neck becoming like leather. By the 10th day, the smell is overwhelming. The skin has begun to rot, attracting flies and releasing the sweet, nauseating odor of decomposing flesh. But the priest cannot remove it. The ritual requires him to wear it until it falls off naturally or the 20 days are complete. Citizens of Tenochtitlan go about their daily business, buying food and conducting trade with priests whose clothing consists of rotting human skin. Children play in plazas while religious leaders walk among them dripping pieces of putrefied flesh. This is normal. This is sacred. By the 20th day, the skin has shrunk so much it's cutting off circulation to the priest's extremities. His fingers might be blue from lack of blood flow, his movements restricted by the tightening skin suit. Pieces begin falling off, a finger here, a strip of face there. When the 20 days are complete, the priests finally remove what remains of the skins. By now, they're partially mummified, leather-like, carrying the imprint of the priest's body beneath. These remnants are carefully collected and buried in special chambers beneath the temple. Every year, when the rains approach and the planting season begins, the Aztecs repeat this ceremony, creating a new crop of skin-wearing priests to ensure the agricultural cycle continues, drowning the beautiful children's tears for rain. The Aztecs believed that the more terror and tears they could extract from beautiful children before drowning them, the more rain would fall to save their crops. So they developed psychological torture techniques specifically designed to maximize childhood trauma, describing in vivid detail how the children would die while dangling them over dark cenotes filled with the rotting corpses of previous victims. Tonight, we're exploring a systematic program of child sacrifice that makes modern horror movies look like Saturday morning cartoons. You're standing in the plaza as the priests make their selection. Not just any children will do. The victims must be perfect, beautiful faces unmarked by disease, clear voices for singing sacred songs, and most importantly, the ability to cry. Because the tears of the dying children will become the rain that saves the crops. The chosen children range in age from toddlers who can barely walk to adolescents just approaching puberty. They've been purchased from families across the empire, parents who sold their most beautiful offspring for the honor of feeding the rain gods. For weeks before the ceremony, these children are prepared like living dolls. They're bathed daily in scented water, fed honey and flowers, dressed in blue and white garments that represent clouds and water. Priests teach them the songs they'll sing as they die. But here's where the ceremony becomes truly twisted. The priests need the children to cry. Specifically, they need them to cry at the moment of death, because their tears are believed to encourage the rain gods to weep as well. So the entire ritual is designed to terrify and torment the children while they're being killed. The ceremony begins before dawn at the sacred cenote, a deep, water-filled sinkhole that serves as a natural gateway to the underworld realm of the rain gods. The priests have carved steps down into the cavern, but they end well above the water level. The first child is brought forward, a girl perhaps 5 years old, dressed in a beautiful blue hupil decorated with silver threads. She's been drugged lightly with sacred mushrooms, not enough to make her unconscious, but enough to make everything seem dreamlike and strange. The priest carrying her begins to chant, describing in vivid detail what's about to happen. He tells her about the dark water below, about how cold it will be, about how her lungs will fill with water and she'll struggle to breathe. This isn't cruelty for its own sake. It's calculated psychological manipulation designed to produce the maximum amount of tears. As the child begins to understand what's happening, she starts to cry, soft whimpering at first, then louder sobbing as the full horror of her situation becomes clear. The priests collect these tears on jade plates because they're considered as precious as the child's life itself. Other priests join the chanting, describing the journey the child will take through the underwater realm of Tlaloc. They tell her about the tentacled monsters that guard the rain god's palace, about the storms she'll have to survive. The child's crying becomes hysterical now, exactly what the priests want. Her tears flow freely as she's carried to the edge of the platform overlooking the dark water below. The cenote stretches down into blackness, the surface so far below that drop stones disappear into silence before hitting the water. The priest holding her dangles her over the edge, letting her see the drop, letting her imagination fill with terror about the crushing impact and the cold water that will fill her lungs. Her screams echo through the cavern, mixing with the chanting to create a symphony of religious horror. Then he lets her go. The child falls through the darkness, her blue dress fluttering like wings, her screams growing fainter as she disappears into the black water below. The impact sends ripples across the surface, and then silence. But she's not dead yet. Children are remarkably buoyant, and many survive the fall to struggle in the water below. The priests wait and listen for the sounds of drowning, the splashing, the coughing, the desperate attempts to reach the sides of the cenote that are too high and too smooth to climb. These sounds of struggle are interpreted as the child's communication with the rain gods. Sometimes the drowning takes minutes. The priest can hear the child calling for help, sobbing, trying to stay afloat in the cold water. But no rescue comes. This prolonged dying is considered essential. The longer the child suffers, the more rain will eventually fall. One by one, other children are brought forward. Some are too young to understand what's happening and are thrown in while still confused and trusting. Others are old enough to comprehend their fate and fight desperately against the priests, their terror and tears exactly what the ritual requires. The priests have developed techniques for maximizing the children's fear and crying. They describe the monsters waiting in the water below. They tell the children about how long drowning takes, about the burning sensation in their lungs. Some children are shown the bodies of previous victims floating in the cenote before they're thrown in themselves. By the end of the ceremony, dozens of children have been thrown into the cenote. Their bodies float in the dark water below, visible only as pale shapes in the blackness. The priests pour offerings of jade, gold, and copal incense into the water, feeding the gods who now possess these young souls. Within days or weeks, storms usually do arrive, because this is the seasonal pattern in central Mexico, and the priests time their ceremonies accordingly. When the rain falls, the community celebrates the success of their sacrifice, convinced that the tears and terror of the drowned children have appeased the gods. And if the rains don't come when expected, the priests know what to do. They need more children, more tears, more drowning screams echoing through sacred caverns. Living gods marked for death. Meet the Xiptla, humans who were told they were gods, treated like royalty for exactly 1 year, and then willingly walked to their own execution while thousands cheered. This isn't Stockholm Syndrome. This is the most sophisticated brainwashing program ever devised, where Aztec psychologists could take a prisoner of war and transform them into someone who genuinely believed their torture murder was the greatest honor possible. We're entering the mind control facilities where normal humans were systematically broken down and rebuilt as enthusiastic participants in their own ritual slaughter, complete with sexual conditioning, fake miracles, and identity reconstruction that would make CIA interrogators jealous. You're in Tenochtitlan, watching the selection ceremony for next year's Tezcatlipoca, Xiptla. The priests have spent months searching for the perfect candidate, a young man with flawless physical beauty, musical ability, and the psychological strength to live as a god while knowing he's marked for death. The chosen one is perhaps 20 years old, tall and lean with unmarked skin and a face so perfectly symmetrical it seems carved rather than born. He's been a prisoner of war, but his fate will be far different from ordinary captives who die quickly on pyramid altars. He has been selected for the highest honor possible, to become a living god for 1 full year. The transformation begins immediately. He's taken to special chambers within the temple complex where his old identity is literally washed away. Every inch of his body is scrubbed clean, his hair is cut and styled in the manner of Tezcatlipoca, and his skin is painted with sacred designs that mark him as divine. But the most important change is psychological. From this moment forward, he is not a prisoner or a person. He is Tezcatlipoca walking on earth. Every priest bows to him. Every citizen treats him as a living deity, and every luxury of the empire is placed at his disposal. He's taught to walk like a god, with slow, measured steps that convey divine authority. He learns the sacred songs and dances associated with Tezcatlipoca, practices the gestures and expressions that show divine wisdom, and memorizes the prayers he'll recite during public ceremonies. For the first months, this existence might seem like paradise. He's worshipped wherever he goes, given anything he desires, and treated as the most important person in the empire. Citizens compete for the chance to serve him, to touch his clothing, or even to catch a glimpse of his divine face. The living god is given a palace to inhabit, decorated with murals depicting the mythic adventures of Tezcatlipoca. He has gardens where he can walk among flowers planted specifically for his enjoyment, pools where he can bathe in water, scented with precious herbs. He's also given everything that might bring him pleasure. Fine foods prepared by master cooks, wine and other intoxicants to ease his mind, and even sexual companions chosen for their beauty and skill. The empire spares no expense in ensuring their living god experiences every earthly pleasure before he transcends to true divinity. But as the months pass, the psychological weight of his situation begins to manifest. He knows, has always known, exactly when his year will end. The priests remind him regularly that his death is not just inevitable, but necessary for the cosmic order. The really twisted aspect is how the community participates in this psychological conditioning. Citizens don't see him as a victim being prepared for slaughter. They see him as the most blessed person alive, someone who will achieve immortality through ritual death. As the year progresses, subtle changes begin. The living god starts to notice that his servants watch him more carefully, that his movements are more restricted, that certain topics are avoided in conversation. His meals are monitored to ensure he maintains perfect health. His sleep is observed to guarantee he doesn't harm himself. The priests begin preparing him more intensively for his death. They teach him the specific prayers he'll recite as the obsidian knife approaches his chest. They explain exactly how the sacrifice will proceed, describing it in clinical detail so he can participate consciously in his own transformation to divinity. During the final months, for young women are brought to serve as his wives, beautiful maidens who have also been selected for sacrifice. They're trained to comfort him, to reinforce the religious justification for his death, and to die alongside him when his time comes. As the final weeks approach, the ceremonies become more frequent and more elaborate. The living god participates in rituals across the city, always aware that each appearance brings him closer to the pyramid altar. The crowds grow larger and more fervent, sensing the approaching climax of a year-long worship cycle. On the last night, he's given a final feast, foods he's learned to love during his year of luxury, prepared with special care as his final earthly pleasure. His 4 wives spend the night with him, providing comfort and companionship as his final hours pass. The morning of the sacrifice, the living god dresses in his finest regalia and walks through the city in a final procession. Citizens line the streets to catch a glimpse of their departing deity, many weeping openly at the beauty of his willing sacrifice. At the pyramid, he climbs the steps with slow dignity, his 4 wives following behind. At the top, he's given one final chance to address the crowd below, to speak as a god to his worshippers before becoming a sacrifice to higher gods. Then he lies down on the sacrifice stone, not fighting or pleading, but participating willingly in the ritual that will transform him from living god to divine essence. Mass slaughter when the pyramids ran red. In 1487, the Aztecs held the largest human sacrifice in recorded history, killing over 80,000 people in 4 days to dedicate a single temple. This wasn't chaotic murder. This was industrial-scale execution with assembly line efficiency, where teams of priests worked in shifts to process thousands of victims while their blood literally flowed down pyramid steps like waterfalls. Spanish chronicles describe priests so covered in gore they were unrecognizable, spectators whose clothes were soaked in blood spray from above, and pools of human blood so deep they reflected the sky like crimson mirrors. Tonight we're witnessing systematic genocide disguised as religious celebration, where an entire civilization watched the largest murder spree in human history and called it beautiful. The priests have been planning this dedication ceremony for months, and their vision is staggering in its scope. They're not thinking in terms of dozens of victims or even hundreds. They're planning to kill thousands of people in a single event, turning the temple dedication into the largest mass murder in recorded human history. You're standing in the great plaza of Tenochtitlan as the ceremony begins. The space can hold over 100,000 people, and today it's packed beyond capacity. Citizens have traveled from across the empire to witness this historic sacrifice. But the crowd in the plaza isn't just spectators, they're participants. Thousands of the people you see around you are prisoners of war, captured specifically for this ceremony. They're not in chains or cages. They're standing quietly in organized lines that stretch from the plaza to the pyramid steps, waiting their turn to die. The systematic nature of what's about to happen is breathtaking. This isn't chaotic slaughter. It's industrial murder organized with the efficiency of a factory production line. 4 separate altars have been constructed on the pyramid, each staffed with teams of priests trained to work in coordinated shifts. The sacrifice begins at dawn and will continue without interruption for 4 days and nights. The logistics alone are staggering. Feeding stations for the priests, sharpening stations for obsidian blades, removal crews for bodies, and collection teams for hearts. At each altar, 4 priests grab a victim's limbs while a 5th performs the heart extraction. But unlike the careful, ceremonial killings of individual sacrifices, these executions are rapid and efficient. Each team can complete a sacrifice in under 2 minutes, cut, extract, throw the body down the steps, grab the next victim. The sound is indescribable. 4 altars working simultaneously, each producing the wet, cutting sounds of obsidian slicing through flesh, the thuds of bodies hitting stone, the scraping noise of corpses tumbling down pyramid steps. Underneath it all, the constant drumming and ritual chanting. The bodies don't just disappear after execution. They pile up at the base of the pyramid in growing mounds of corpses. Special teams of workers drag them away to be processed, some for ritual cannibalism by priests and nobles, others for burial in sacred locations. The smell becomes overwhelming within hours. Thousands of open chest wounds bleeding simultaneously, the contents of ruptured organs spilling onto the stone platforms, the waste released by dying bodies losing muscular control. The air grows thick with the metallic scent of blood and the ammonia tang of decomposition. But what makes this truly disturbing is the reaction of the crowd. They're not horrified by the industrial slaughter happening above them. They're celebrating. The dedication of the Great Temple is a festival, the most important religious event in generations. Families share food while watching the executions. The priests begin to show signs of exhaustion after the first day, but the killing continues. Their arms are sore from repetitive cutting motions. Their hands are cramped from gripping obsidian blades, and their ceremonial clothing is saturated with blood. But stopping isn't an option. The gods must receive their offering. Spanish chronicles describe blood flowing down the pyramid steps like waterfalls, pooling at the bottom in lakes that reflected the sky. They describe priests so covered in gore that their original skin color was invisible, and spectators whose clothing was spattered with blood from the executions happening above. The numbers become abstract after a while. One contemporary account claims 80,400 people were killed during the 4-day dedication ceremony, though this figure might be exaggerated. Even conservative estimates place the death toll in the thousands. More people murdered in 4 days than died in most medieval battles. The dedication of the Great Temple became the template for Aztec religious spectacle. The idea that the most sacred ceremonies required the most extensive slaughter, and that the gods could only be properly honored through death on a massive scale. By the end of the 4 days, the pyramid steps were permanently stained with blood that would never completely wash away. The plaza below was littered with evidence of the slaughter, discarded obsidian blades, pools of coagulated blood, and scattered remains that would take weeks to fully clean up. They had successfully dedicated their temple with the largest sacrifice in human history, establishing a standard of religious murder that would continue until the Spanish conquest finally ended the bloodbath. The underground journey, preparing bodies for hell. Death wasn't the end for the Aztecs. It was the beginning of a 4-year torture journey through 9 levels of supernatural hell, where your conscious soul would be systematically stripped of everything human. Picture winds made of obsidian knives that slice your spiritual flesh from your bones. Mountains that crush souls into paste while keeping them aware, and shadow jaguars that hunt the dead for centuries while feeding on their essence. The Aztecs created the most detailed and horrifying afterlife ever conceived, where even a glorious death in sacrifice only earned you the right to be tortured by cosmic forces until nothing remained but purified spiritual energy. Death wasn't escape. It was just changing the type of agony you'd experience. Your body is being prepared for this journey by priests who understand that death is just the beginning of your trials. They're not embalming you like the Egyptians. They're equipping you for supernatural warfare. Obsidian blades are placed in your mouth to fight the monsters you'll encounter. Jade stones are inserted under your tongue to pay tolls to underworld guardians. Sacred bundles of papers covered in your blood are wrapped around your limbs to prove your sacrificial worthiness. The priests paint your corpse with specific designs that serve as passports through different regions of Mictlan. Black paint around the eyes to see through the darkness. Red stripes on the arms to show you shed blood in life. Yellow symbols on the chest to identify you as an offering rather than an escaped soul. Now your consciousness begins the descent. The first level of Mictlan is deceptively peaceful, rolling hills covered in mist, with a recently dead wander in confusion. But this tranquility is temporary. Soon you hear the howling of the wind god Ehecatl, whose supernatural breath will strip the flesh from your bones. The wind hits like frozen knives, carrying obsidian particles that slice through your spiritual body. This isn't metaphorical suffering. In Aztec belief, the soul retains sensation, feeling every cut every impact, every moment of agony, as if it were happening to living flesh. The wind tears away your skin in strips, your muscles in chunks, leaving bloody bone exposed to the supernatural elements. The second level brings new horrors. Here, mountains slam together in perpetual motion, crushing anything caught between them. These aren't random geological events. They're intelligent, malevolent forces that time their movements to catch souls trying to pass through. You have to run between the crushing peaks, timing your movement to avoid being pulverized. Souls who misjudge the timing disappear between the stone faces with wet, crunching sounds. But death here isn't final. They reform, still conscious, still in agony, forced to attempt the passage again and again until they either succeed or go mad from the repeated crushing. The third level is the realm of the obsidian knife beast, a creature made entirely of volcanic glass that cuts everything it touches. It's not trying to kill you. It's performing surgery without anesthesia, slicing away parts of your spiritual essence that it considers impure. Each cut removes memories, emotions, fragments of your human identity. You can feel your personality being carved away slice by slice. The love you felt for family members disappears with one cut. Your fear of death is removed with another. Your capacity for joy, for anger, for any human emotion is systematically excised until you're becoming something else. Pure, perhaps, but no longer the person who began this journey. Level 4 brings the freezing winds that can crystallize spiritual essence. Souls caught in these supernatural blizzards become living ice sculptures, conscious but immobile, watching other travelers pass by while they're slowly transformed into frozen statues. Some have been trapped here for centuries, their eyes still moving, still aware, but unable to speak or move. The fifth level is where most souls give up entirely. Here, jaguars made of shadow hunt the dead, not to kill them, but to play with them. These creatures can phase in and out of visibility, appearing just long enough to rake claws across your spiritual flesh before disappearing again. They're intelligent, malicious, and they enjoy causing maximum psychological trauma. The shadow jaguars can mimic the voices of people you loved in life, calling out for help from the darkness. Souls who try to help these phantom voices find themselves led into traps where the creatures feed slowly on their spiritual essence, keeping their victims conscious throughout the consumption process. Level 6 brings the rivers of blood, not metaphorical blood, but actual rivers flowing with the essence of everyone who has ever died violently. You must swim through this crimson flood while being attacked by the spiritual remnants of murder victims, suicide spirits, and the ghosts of sacrificial offerings. The blood is thick, viscous, hard to move through. It gets in your mouth, your eyes, your spiritual lungs. You're swimming through the concentrated essence of violent death, absorbing the fear and pain of countless victims while fighting off their attempts to steal your identity and use your body for their own escape. The seventh level introduces the lizards that shoot arrows. These creatures are perfect marksmen, able to hit any target regardless of how fast it moves. But their arrows don't kill. They inject venom that causes hallucinations, making souls see their worst fears manifested as physical reality. Level 8 is ruled by the wind that carries knives. This isn't like the flesh-stripping wind of the first level. These knives are intelligent, seeking out specific targets, cutting with surgical precision to remove particular aspects of your spiritual anatomy. Some blades cut away your ability to remember human language. Others remove your capacity to feel physical sensations. The ninth and final level is the throne room of Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli, the Lord and Lady of the Dead. By the time you reach them, you've been stripped of almost everything that made you human. Your flesh is gone. Your memories are fragments. Your emotions have been surgically removed. But this isn't the end. It's the final test. The death gods examine what remains of your spiritual essence, determining whether you've been sufficiently purified by your journey to join their realm or whether you need to repeat the entire process. Some souls are sent back to level 1 to begin again. Others are accepted into the underworld but assigned to eternal labor in the fields of bones that feed the death gods. Only a very few, those who have endured the full journey without losing their essential spiritual core, are granted true rest in the peaceful sections of Mictlan, where they can exist without pain or fear until the world ends and all souls are recycled into the next cosmic cycle. Blood schedules, the calendar of killing. The Aztec calendar wasn't a way to track time. It was a systematic plan for different types of human sacrifice every 18 days. Spring meant flaying people alive and wearing their skins. Summer required drowning priests in boiling salt water. Autumn demanded burning victims while collecting their screams in ritual vessels. And winter called for mass sacrifice events where hundreds died in choreographed slaughter. This wasn't random violence. This was a civilization that had turned murder into administrative planning, with detailed victim specifications, execution methods, and body disposal procedures that operated with factory-like efficiency. Every day of the year was scheduled around someone's ritualized death. You're looking at an Aztec calendar, not the famous circular stone that tourists photograph, but the working calendar that priests used to plan the year's religious murders. It's a manual for systematic killing, complete with victim specifications, execution methods, and body disposal procedures. The year begins with Atalkawalo, the ceremony of stopping water. February, when the rain should end and the dry season should begin. But the gods need encouragement to stop the rainfall, and that encouragement comes in the form of drowning children. Not just any children, specific ones chosen for their ability to cry, because their tears as they drown will convince the rain gods to stop weeping themselves. 18 days later comes Tlacaxipwalisli, the flaying of men. March, when the agricultural cycle begins, and the earth needs to shed its old skin to grow new crops. This festival requires live flaying, the careful removal of human skin while keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible. The priests will wear these skins for 20 days afterward. Another 18 days pass, and it's time for Tozastantli, the small vigil. April, when young corn shoots are appearing in the fields. This ceremony requires the sacrifice of children again, but different children killed in a different way. These victims are flayed alive like the adults in the previous ceremony, but their skins are used to dress stone statues of agricultural gods. By May comes Huey Tozatli, the great vigil, when the corn is growing strong and needs protection from pests and disease. This festival demands the sacrifice of young women, specifically virgins who have been trained in weaving and cooking. They're not killed quickly on pyramid altars. They're slowly strangled with ceremonial cords while priests examine their death, throws for omens about the coming harvest. June brings Toxcatl, perhaps the most psychologically twisted ceremony in the Aztec calendar. This is when the year-long Exiptla of Tezcatlipoca reaches the end of his divine incarnation. For 12 months, this young man has lived as a god, worshipped by thousands, given every luxury the empire can provide. Now he climbs the pyramid steps willingly, breaks the flute he's carried all year, and lies down on the sacrifice stone to have his heart cut out while fully conscious and cooperative. The calendar continues its bloody progression through summer. Etzalculisli in July requires the drowning of priests themselves, volunteers who have reached the end of their service and offer themselves as sacrifices to the rain gods. Tecuahuatantli in August demands the killing of salt workers, thrown into boiling brine and cooked alive while their fellow workers watch and sing. Each ceremony requires months of preparation. Victims must be selected, trained, and psychologically conditioned. Priests must practice their killing techniques to ensure smooth execution. Materials must be gathered, obsidian blades sharpened to surgical precision, ceremonial costumes prepared, sacred spaces cleaned and consecrated. The autumn festivals grow even darker. Akpanitli in September celebrates the earth goddess Tosi with the sacrifice of a woman who is flayed alive, then skinned, with a priest wearing her flesh to represent the goddess. Paktantli in October requires the burning of living victims, tied to stakes and slowly roasted while priests collect their screams in ritual vessels. The calendar doesn't just schedule killing, it schedules specific types of killing. Some festivals require drowning, others flaying, still others burning or strangulation. Each method produces different types of spiritual energy that feed different gods. The priests have developed a theological taxonomy of murder. Winter brings its own horrors. Quechali in November is the festival of hunters, requiring the sacrifice of captured animals and their human companions. Prisoners who have been forced to live with and care for sacred beasts before being killed alongside them. Panquetzalizli in December celebrates the war god with mass sacrifice events where hundreds of captives are killed in organized ceremonies. The calendar's final ceremony, Adamatli in January, requires the sacrifice of water spirits. Humans who have been selected to represent rain gods and who are drowned in elaborate ceremonies designed to ensure sufficient water for the coming agricultural year. But the true horror of this system isn't just the individual ceremonies. It's the way it transforms an entire society's relationship with time. Citizens don't plan vacations or look forward to peaceful holidays. They plan their lives around scheduled atrocities, marking their personal calendars with reminders about which family members might be selected for sacrifice during which festivals. Children grow up learning not just the alphabet and basic mathematics, but also the festival schedule and the types of death associated with each ceremony. They understand from early age that their own lives might be required at any time, for any festival, depending on their physical characteristics and spiritual fitness for particular types of sacrifice. The priests maintain detailed records of each ceremony, how many victims were killed, which techniques were used, how the gods responded to the offerings. They track the effectiveness of different sacrifice methods, adjusting their procedures based on results. This creates a religious system that's constantly escalating, always demanding more death, more elaborate ceremonies, more creative forms of murder. The calendar becomes a feedback loop of violence, where each year's atrocities must exceed the previous years to maintain divine favor. By the time the Spanish arrive, this calendar of killing has been operating for centuries, creating a civilization where ritual murder is so deeply embedded in daily life that stopping it seems impossible. The Aztec calendar doesn't measure time. It measures blood, counting the days between atrocities and scheduling the next round of sacred murders with administrative efficiency that would be impressive if it weren't so absolutely horrifying. Burying bodies in cornfields. Here's something that will ruin your next meal. The Aztecs discovered that human flesh makes the best fertilizer, so they systematically buried fresh corpses in their crop fields to feed plants with decomposing human tissue. Every tortilla was made from corn grown in soil enriched with human blood. Every bean was nourished by rotting flesh, and every harvest celebration was literally a feast of cannibalism where people consumed food that had absorbed the essence of sacrificial victims. Children learned to farm by burying severed hands next to corn shoots and scattering ground bone meal around vegetable plants. This wasn't just agriculture. It was systematic conversion of human sacrifice into dinner, making every meal a form of communion with the dead. You're standing in a maize field outside Tenochtitlan, watching the harvest ceremony that concludes each growing season. The corn stalks tower above your head, their ears heavy with grain that will feed the empire for another year. But as you dig your hands into the rich, dark soil, you feel something that makes your stomach turn. Bone fragments, pieces of human teeth, the decomposed remnants of the people who were buried here during planting season. The agricultural priests approach with this season's sacrificial victims, prisoners of war, criminals, and volunteers who have offered themselves to ensure the fertility of the fields. These people aren't going to die on pyramid altars with their hearts removed for the gods. They're going to be killed and buried right here in the soil, their bodies becoming literal nourishment for the crops that will sustain the community. The priest farmers have refined this process over generations, developing techniques that maximize the agricultural benefit of human sacrifice. They know exactly how deep to bury bodies to prevent surface contamination while ensuring proper decomposition. They understand which body parts provide the best nutrients for different crops. The first victim is brought forward, a young warrior captured in recent conflicts. He's been fattened for weeks like livestock, fed a diet rich in maize and honey to improve the nutritional content of his flesh. His body has been specially prepared for agricultural sacrifice, cleaned and blessed, and treated with herbs that will accelerate decomposition once he's buried. The killing method is different from pyramid sacrifice. Instead of quick heart extraction, the agricultural priests use slow strangulation, preserving all the blood and organs that will enrich the soil. The victim is laid across a special wooden frame, and a cord is tightened around his neck gradually, allowing him to remain conscious as his life slowly drains away. As he dies, his blood is collected in pottery vessels and immediately poured into holes dug around corn plants. The priests believe that warm blood, still carrying the victim's life force, provides the most effective nourishment for growing crops. The corpse is then dismembered with obsidian blades, cut into pieces sized for optimal burial distribution. Arms and legs are separated at the joints. The torso is sectioned, and even internal organs are carefully removed and prepared for specific agricultural uses. Nothing is wasted. Every piece of the human body becomes fertilizer. The priests work systematically through the field, burying body parts in carefully planned locations. A severed hand goes here, next to young corn shoots. A section of torso is buried there, where the soil seems less fertile. Internal organs are scattered throughout the field, each type providing different nutrients to different plants. But this isn't just about fertilizer, it's about spiritual nourishment. The Aztecs believed that plants are conscious entities that require more than physical nutrients to thrive. They need spiritual energy, life force extracted from human sacrifices and transferred directly into the soil through burial of fresh flesh. Different crops require different types of human sacrifice. Corn prefers young warriors, whose strength transfers to the stalks. Beans grow best with the buried flesh of pregnant women, whose fertility enhances the plant's reproductive capability. Squash thrives on the remains of children, whose innocence purifies the soil and produces sweeter fruit. The priests maintain detailed records of which body parts produce the best results for different crops. They've learned that burying hearts near corn roots produces taller stalks, that scattering ground bone meal improves bean yields, and that burying skulls creates particularly fertile soil patches that last for multiple growing seasons. The psychological impact on the farming community is complex. They eat food grown from human remains daily, understanding that every tortilla contains elements of sacrificial victims. But this isn't seen as cannibalism. It's seen as participating in the cosmic cycle of life and death that sustains all existence. Children learn agriculture by helping to bury pieces of sacrificed humans. They're taught which body parts go where, how deep to dig the holes, and how to properly distribute flesh for maximum crop benefit. Playing in cornfields means playing among human remains, but this is considered normal and even sacred. During harvest season, the community celebrates not just the successful crops, but the successful decomposition of the sacrificial victims. Priests dig up burial sites to examine how completely the bodies have been absorbed into the soil. Complete decomposition is seen as evidence that the sacrifices were accepted by the earth goddess. The harvest festival includes ritual consumption of the first fruits grown from human fertilizer. The community gathers to eat corn, beans, and squash while singing songs that honor the sacrificial victims whose bodies made the feast possible. Children are taught to thank the dead for providing their flesh to nourish the living. The most disturbing aspect of this system is how it turns consumption into a form of communion with the dead. Every meal becomes a ritual acknowledgement that the living survive by consuming the dead, that agriculture requires murder, and that the most basic act of eating is participation in systematic human sacrifice. When the Spanish conquistadors first see these fields, they're amazed by the size and quality of Aztec crops. They don't initially understand that the remarkable fertility comes from centuries of systematic human burial, that every kernel of corn represents the decomposed flesh of sacrificial victims. The Aztecs have created an agricultural system that's literally built on death, where farming and human sacrifice are inseparable and were the most basic act of survival. Eating requires participation in ritualized murder. Training killers, the priest schools of murder. Imagine sending your 6-year-old child to a school where the curriculum was systematic murder. The textbooks were surgical manuals for heart extraction, and graduation required successfully torturing someone to death while keeping them conscious. Welcome to the Calmacac, elite Aztec academies where noble children spent over a decade learning to become professional killers through hands-on practice with living animals, detailed study of human anatomy for optimal cutting techniques, and psychological conditioning that eliminated their capacity for empathy. These weren't just schools. They were murder factories that transformed normal children into efficient human slaughter specialists who could extract a beating heart in under 3 minutes while maintaining perfect religious composure. The very first lesson isn't reading or mathematics. It's watching a sacrifice. All the new students are brought to the pyramid altar at dawn to observe a heart extraction performed by master priests. This isn't meant to shock or traumatize you. It's meant to normalize the idea that cutting people open is a sacred, beautiful act that you'll spend the rest of your life perfecting. The priest instructor explains each step as he performs it. See how the obsidian blade slides between the ribs without resistance? Notice the angle of entry. Too steep and you damage the heart. Too shallow and you can't reach it. Watch how I use my fingers to locate the organ by touch. You're encouraged to ask questions. How long does the victim stay conscious? What's the best way to keep the heart beating after extraction? Why do some sacrifices scream more than others? These aren't morbid curiosities. They're legitimate academic inquiries that will help you become a better ritual killer. Your textbooks aren't filled with literature or philosophy. They're medical manuals illustrated with diagrams of human anatomy, focused specifically on sacrifice techniques. You learn to identify the major organs not for healing, but for removal. You study circulation patterns to understand how to cut arteries for maximum blood flow. The school maintains a collection of preserved human organs that students handle daily. You learn to recognize a healthy heart by its weight and texture, to identify diseased lungs that might interfere with proper sacrifice, to assess liver condition that indicates victim fitness for ritual purposes. Practice sessions begin with small animals, rabbits, birds, even insects. You learn to hold your obsidian blade properly, to make clean cuts without hesitation, to work efficiently without wasted motion. The priests grade you on technique, speed, and your ability to keep the animal conscious during the procedure. As you advance, the practice animals get larger. Dogs, then sheep, then eventually human-sized animals like deer or large cats. By the time you're 10 years old, you can perform a complete heart extraction on a living animal in under 3 minutes, working with surgical precision while the creature remains aware throughout the process. The psychological conditioning is as important as the technical training. You're taught that killing isn't murder, it's cosmic maintenance. Every sacrifice feeds the gods who keep the universe running. Every heart extraction prevents the sun from dying. You're not learning to be a killer. You're learning to be a cosmic engineer whose job requires taking lives to maintain existence itself. Religious instruction focuses heavily on sacrifice theology. You memorize the mythic precedents for human sacrifice, learning how the gods killed themselves to create the world and how humans must return the favor to keep it functioning. You study the different types of sacrifice required by different deities. Mathematics education focuses on practical applications for sacrifice logistics. How many victims are needed for major ceremonies? How do you calculate blood volume requirements for different rituals? What's the optimal spacing for mass sacrifice events to maintain crowd engagement? Advanced students begin practicing on human subjects, volunteers, criminals, and designated practice victims who understand their role in training the next generation of priests. These practice sessions are carefully supervised, with master priests correcting your technique and helping you develop the steady hands and strong stomach necessary for professional sacrifice work. The school maintains detailed records of student progress, tracking each apprentice's development in different areas of sacrifice expertise. Some students show particular talent for heart extraction and are channeled toward that specialization. Others excel at flaying or drowning techniques and receive advanced training in those methods. Competition between students is encouraged through sacrifice contests where apprentices are judged on speed, precision, and artistic presentation. The best students receive recognition and fast-track advancement to higher positions in the religious hierarchy. Field trips take students to sacrifice sites throughout the empire, exposing them to different regional techniques and specialized methods used by local priests. You might visit a drowning facility to observe child sacrifice procedures, tour a flaying center to study skin removal techniques, or attend a mass sacrifice event. The final examinations are practical demonstrations where students must perform complete sacrifice ceremonies from beginning to end. You're judged on technical execution, ritual knowledge, psychological preparation of victims, and ability to maintain proper religious demeanor throughout the killing process. Graduation requirements include successful completion of a solo sacrifice, killing a human being entirely on your own while being observed by master priests. This final test determines whether you're ready for independent practice or need additional training. By the time you graduate from the Kalmakak, you've spent over a decade learning to see human beings as raw materials for religious production. You can kill efficiently and without emotional disturbance. You understand the theological justifications for murder and the technical requirements for proper sacrifice. You've been transformed from a normal child into a professional killer whose expertise serves the most sophisticated religious system of ritual murder ever developed. Night terrors. When shapeshifters hunt, your neighbors aren't what they seem. When darkness falls, ordinary Aztec citizens shed their human forms and prowl the streets as supernatural predators. Nawali, who hunt children for sport, tear throats with their bare hands, and can dislocate their jaws to inject paralytic venom into their victims. These aren't mythological creatures. They're humans who've undergone years of psychological conditioning involving sleep deprivation, hallucinogenic drugs, and systematic destruction of their empathy until they could transform into conscious predators that retain human intelligence while gaining animal killing instincts. Tonight, we're exploring a society where your priest, your teacher, or your neighbor might be a shape-shifting cannibal who spends their nights hunting human prey through the streets of Tenochtitlan. You're lying in your small adobe house, trying to sleep, when you hear the sound that makes every Aztec parent pull their children closer. The scraping of claws on stone walls, the soft padding of feet that are too large to be human, but too intelligent to be animal. The Nawali are hunting tonight. These shapeshifters aren't born with their abilities. They earn them through years of grueling training that pushes human consciousness to its breaking point. The process begins in childhood, when certain students at the Kalmakak show particular aptitude for psychological transformation. The first stage involves sleep deprivation so extreme it induces hallucinations. Apprentice Nawali are kept awake for days at a time, while being fed psychoactive plants that alter perception and weaken the barriers between human and animal consciousness. They begin to see reality differently, understanding that the division between species is an illusion that can be overcome through proper technique. Training continues with intensive study of specific animals: jaguars, owls, coyotes, snakes. The students learn to observe their chosen animal with obsessive attention to detail, memorizing every movement, every sound, every behavioral pattern until they can replicate the creature's actions perfectly. The psychological conditioning involves breaking down human identity through systematic destruction of personal attachments. Apprentices are forced to kill and eat their own pets, to watch their families being tortured, to participate in increasingly extreme acts of violence until their capacity for human empathy is completely destroyed. Physical transformation training begins with contortion exercises that allow the body to move in non-human ways. Students learn to dislocate joints, to compress their rib cages, to alter their posture so dramatically that their silhouette becomes animal-like, even while maintaining human form. The crucial breakthrough comes when the apprentice learns to enter the transformation trance, a psychological state achieved through specific breathing patterns, ritual scarification, and consumption of powerful hallucinogens. In this altered consciousness, the boundaries between self and animal dissolve completely. During transformation, the Nawali doesn't physically become an animal. They become something worse. They retain human intelligence while gaining animal instincts, creating a predator that can think strategically while being driven by supernatural hunger for human flesh and blood. The change is visible to anyone watching. The person's eyes reflect light like an animal's. Their pupils dilate to black circles. Their breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Their fingers curl into claw-like positions. Their posture shifts to a predatory crouch, and their facial expression becomes utterly inhuman. In this transformed state, Nawali possess enhanced strength, speed, and sensory perception. They can see in complete darkness, hear heartbeats from across a plaza, smell fear and blood from incredible distances. But most terrifyingly, they retain full human memory and planning ability while being driven by an overwhelming compulsion to hunt and kill. The hunt begins after midnight, when the transformed Nawali slip from their houses and prowl through the city streets. They move through shadows with animal grace, scaling walls like cats, moving silently across rooftops, entering homes through gaps that seem too small for human bodies. Their preferred prey are children, easier to overpower, more tender to consume, and less likely to be believed if they survive to describe their attackers. The Nawali can smell youth and innocence, tracking potential victims by scent trails that lead them directly to nurseries and children's sleeping areas. The killing methods vary by the Nawali's animal spirit. Those who channel jaguars prefer to crush skulls with their bare hands, feeling the bone crumple under pressure while their victims remain conscious. Owl spirits attack silently from above, tearing throats with fingernails grown long and sharp through ritual modification. Snake Nawali are perhaps the most horrifying, as they can dislocate their jaws to bite with supernatural force, injecting venom produced by glands they've developed through years of consuming poisonous substances. Their victims die slowly, paralyzed but aware as the Nawali feeds on their still-living flesh. The consumption isn't just physical, it's spiritual. Nawali believe they absorb the life force and memories of their victims, gaining strength and knowledge from each kill. They prefer to keep victims alive during feeding, maximizing the transfer of spiritual energy through prolonged terror and pain. The aftermath of Nawali attacks is deliberately gruesome. Bodies are found with distinctive claw marks, bite patterns, and consumption wounds that clearly indicate supernatural predation. But the evidence serves a purpose beyond mere killing. It's psychological warfare designed to keep communities in a state of constant terror. Parents learn to recognize the signs of Nawali presence in their neighborhoods. Children who wake screaming about animal people in their rooms aren't having nightmares. They're reporting actual encounters with shapeshifters who enjoy terrorizing their prey before deciding whether to kill immediately or return later. The most sophisticated Nawali develop the ability to maintain partial transformation during daylight hours, allowing them to function normally in human society while retaining enhanced predatory abilities. These individuals become community leaders, using their positions to identify potential victims and protect their fellow shapeshifters from discovery. Detection of Nawali is nearly impossible because they're indistinguishable from normal humans when not transformed. They participate in daily community life, conduct business, attend religious ceremonies, and raise families while secretly planning their next hunt. Community response to suspected Nawali involves vigilante justice that's almost as brutal as the shapeshifters themselves. Suspected individuals are subjected to torture designed to force transformation, burned alive to prevent spiritual escape, or buried in specially prepared graves that prevent their return as vengeful spirits. But the most disturbing aspect of Nawali activity is how it's integrated into the broader religious system. These shapeshifters aren't considered evil or criminal. They're seen as necessary predators who maintain cosmic balance by culling the weak and feeding the spiritual forces that keep the universe functioning. When Spanish missionaries first encounter reports of Nawali, they interpret them as evidence of demonic possession and diabolic worship. But the reality is more complex and more disturbing. These are humans who have deliberately transformed themselves into supernatural predators through systematic psychological and physical conditioning that represents one of the most sophisticated forms of induced madness ever developed. Beautiful death, choreographed combat murder. Welcome to the most elegant execution method ever devised. Gladiatorial sacrifice, where captured warriors fought 6 fully armed opponents using weapons made of feathers, while crowds of 100,000 people watched and judged the artistic quality of their slow dismemberment. This wasn't a fair fight. It was choreographed murder disguised as sport, where skilled Aztec warriors gradually cut their victims apart while keeping them conscious and fighting for maximum entertainment value. The goal wasn't quick death, but beautiful suffering. Spectators rated performances based on how gracefully the victim bled, how courageously they fought with useless weapons, and how artistically their blood flowed across the stone platform. Death became performance art, and murder became the most popular form of public entertainment. You're standing in the crowd surrounding the Temela cattle, a circular stone platform about 15 feet across, slightly raised above the plaza floor. This isn't an arena for fair combat. It's a stage for ritualized slaughter disguised as sporting competition, where the outcome is predetermined, but the entertainment value comes from watching how beautifully the victim dies. The prisoner being led toward the platform is a warrior captured in recent flower wars, selected not just for his fighting ability, but for his physical beauty and theatrical potential. He's been kept in perfect condition for months, well-fed, exercised, trained in the specific combat techniques that will make his death most entertaining for the spectators. His weapons are brought forward with great ceremony. A wooden club edged with feathers instead of obsidian blades, and a shield made of reeds instead of tough leather and wood. These aren't weapons at all. They're props designed to look impressive while being completely useless against real combat gear. The priests paint his body with designs that tell the story of his upcoming death, symbols that represent his journey from mortal warrior to divine sacrifice. White chalk around his eyes to help him see the path to the afterlife. Red lines across his chest to mark where his heart will be extracted. His opponents approach. 6 fully armed Aztec warriors wearing complete battle gear, wielding sharp obsidian-edged clubs and carrying shields that can deflect any blow. But they're not trying to kill him quickly. Their job is to wound him gradually, to create a spectacle of slow dismemberment that demonstrates both their skill and his courage. The first warrior steps onto the platform and immediately takes a defensive position. The prisoner, knowing this is his only chance to die with honor, attacks aggressively with his feathered club. The crowd cheers as he delivers a powerful blow that will be devastating with a real weapon, but merely bounces off his opponent's shield with a harmless thud. The Aztec warrior responds with a precise cut across the prisoner's thigh, deep enough to cause serious bleeding, but not deep enough to cripple him immediately. Blood flows down his leg, dark and bright in the afternoon sun, creating the first dramatic visual effect of the performance. The prisoner continues fighting, trying to land effective blows while blood loss gradually weakens him. His movements become less coordinated, his breathing more labored, but he maintains his warrior's dignity even as he realizes the hopelessness of his situation. The second opponent enters the platform as the first withdraws. This warrior specializes in arm wounds, delivering a precise cut across the prisoner's bicep that slices through muscle and causes his feathered club to drop from nerveless fingers. But he's immediately given a new weapon because the show must continue. Each successive opponent has a specific role in the choreographed death. The third warrior targets the prisoner's other leg, creating matching wounds that will eventually make standing impossible. The fourth focuses on defensive cuts across the torso, creating painful but non-fatal wounds that bleed dramatically while keeping the victim conscious. The crowd's reaction is crucial to the ceremony's success. They're not bloodthirsty spectators cheering for mindless violence. They're connoisseurs of beautiful death, appreciating the skill required to wound without killing. to create spectacular blood effects while maintaining the victim's ability to continue fighting. The prisoner's performance is evaluated by religious standards. He's expected to show courage without desperation, to fight skillfully despite his useless weapons, to bleed dramatically while maintaining his dignity. The gods are watching through the crowd's eyes, judging whether this sacrifice demonstrates proper warrior values. By the fifth opponent, the prisoner is fighting on his knees, unable to stand due to leg wounds, but still wielding his feathered club with determination. His body is covered in precisely placed cuts that create artistic patterns of flowing blood, turning his flesh into a canvas painted with his own life force. The wounds are carefully calculated to avoid major arteries while maximizing visual impact. The warriors have trained extensively to deliver cuts that cause dramatic bleeding without immediate death, keeping their victim conscious and fighting for as long as possible while gradually weakening him through blood loss. The final opponent is often the most skilled warrior available, someone capable of delivering the coup de grace with exceptional artistry. He enters the platform not to wound, but to provide the climactic moment that transforms combat into sacrifice. The ending is always the same. The prisoner, weakened by blood loss and unable to effectively defend himself, is knocked unconscious by a blow to the head. But even this is performed with precision, using just enough force to incapacitate without killing, because the actual sacrifice must be performed by priests rather than warriors. The unconscious prisoner is immediately carried to the sacrificial altar where priests extract his heart while it's still beating. But the heart extraction is almost anticlimactic compared to the elaborate death dance that preceded it. The real ceremony was the gradual dismemberment disguised as combat. The crowd's appreciation focuses on technical excellence, how long the prisoner remained conscious, how beautifully his blood flowed across the stone platform, how courageously he fought despite his impossible situation. Children are taught to recognize good technique, to appreciate the skill involved in creating such elegant death spectacles. The gladiatorial sacrifice serves multiple purposes beyond entertainment. It demonstrates Aztec military superiority by showing how easily their warriors can toy with enemy captives. It provides religious instruction about proper warrior behavior in the face of certain death. And it creates a form of performance art that transforms killing into aesthetic expression. The blood that covers the platform during these ceremonies isn't cleaned between performances. It's considered sacred decoration that enhances each subsequent sacrifice. Layers of dried blood create artistic patterns that complement the fresh bleeding of new victims. When the Spanish conquistadors first witnessed gladiatorial sacrifice, they're simultaneously impressed by the skill involved and horrified by the deliberate prolonging of death for entertainment purposes. They recognize the sophistication of the performance while being appalled by its fundamental cruelty. The gladiatorial sacrifice represents the pinnacle of Aztec achievement in transforming murder into art, creating theatrical experiences that combine athletic skill, religious devotion, and aesthetic beauty in carefully choreographed death performances that remain unmatched in human history for their combination of sophistication and horror. Manufacturing gods, the human factory of divinity. Deep beneath the Great Temple lay the most sophisticated brainwashing facility ever constructed. Chambers where Aztec psychologists could take any human being and, through months of sensory deprivation, drug manipulation, fake miracles, and sexual conditioning, transform them into someone who genuinely believed they were a god and eagerly anticipated their own ritual murder. These weren't torture chambers. They were identity reconstruction centers that operated with success rates approaching 100%, using techniques that combined isolation, hallucinogens, staged supernatural events, and constant worship to completely rewrite human personality. The victims didn't just accept their deaths. They planned their own sacrifice ceremonies and competed for the honor of being killed in the most elaborate ways possible. You're being led through the sacred chambers where next year's crop of Exipla are being prepared. These aren't prisons or torture facilities. They're transformation centers where normal humans are converted into enthusiastic participants in their own execution through techniques that would impress modern behavioral psychologists with their systematic effectiveness. The process begins with careful victim selection based on specific psychological profiles. The priests don't want everyone. They want individuals with particular mental characteristics that make them susceptible to the conditioning process. Ideal candidates show high intelligence, strong imagination, deep religious feelings, and underlying psychological instability that can be exploited. The first stage involves complete sensory isolation. New arrivals are placed in darkened chambers where they can't see, hear, or touch anything except smooth stone walls. They're fed bland food through slots, given water in unmarked containers, and kept in conditions that eliminate all external reference points for reality. This isolation continues for weeks, during which the victims lose track of time, space, and eventually their own identity. Without external stimuli to anchor their sense of self, their psychological defenses begin to crumble, making them susceptible to the reconstruction process that follows. During isolation, the victims experience hallucinations, vivid dreams, and altered states of consciousness that the priests interpret as divine visions. These naturally occurring psychological phenomena are reframed as communications from gods who are calling the victims to their sacred destiny as living deities. The reintroduction to light and human contact is carefully orchestrated to maximize psychological impact. Victims are brought from their dark cells into chambers filled with golden light, beautiful music, and priests dressed in elaborate costumes who treat them as honored guests rather than prisoners. This dramatic contrast, from sensory deprivation to overwhelming beauty, creates powerful emotional responses that the priests exploit to begin identity reconstruction. The victim's relief at escaping isolation is channeled into gratitude toward their captors, who present themselves as servants helping to prepare the victims for their divine roles. The next phase involves intensive education about the specific god the victim will embody. They're taught mythological stories, ceremonial procedures, and theological concepts through repetitive instruction that continues for hours each day. This information is presented not as academic knowledge, but as recovered memories of their true divine nature. Physical transformation accompanies psychological conditioning. The victim's appearances are gradually altered through diet, exercise, cosmetics, and clothing to match their divine roles. They watch themselves becoming more godlike in appearance, which reinforces the psychological conditioning that tells them they are actualizing their true divine nature. Drugs play a crucial role in the transformation process. Victims receive carefully measured doses of hallucinogens, stimulants, and depressants that alter their brain chemistry and make them more susceptible to suggestion. These substances are presented as sacred medicines that help reveal divine truth rather than as tools for psychological manipulation. The social environment is completely controlled to reinforce the desired identity changes. Everyone the victims encounter treats them as gods, bowing, offering gifts, seeking blessings, and expressing honor at being in their presence. This constant worship gradually convinces the victims that they truly are divine beings rather than human sacrifices. Staged supernatural events convince the victims that they possess divine powers. Priests arrange for miracles to occur in their presence. Hidden mechanisms that move statues, trained animals that respond to secret signals, collaborators who pretend to be healed by the victim's touch. These experiences provide concrete evidence that supports the victim's growing belief in their own divinity. The conditioning includes detailed instruction about the sacrifice process itself, but it's presented as divine transformation rather than death. The victims learn that having their hearts removed will complete their apotheosis, transforming them from earthly gods into eternal divine beings. The killing is reframed as the ultimate spiritual achievement. Sexual conditioning is used to break down remaining psychological resistance. Male victims are provided with beautiful women who worship them during intimate encounters, while female victims receive male partners who treat them as goddesses during sexual activities. These experiences create powerful psychological associations between divine identity and physical pleasure. Competition between victims is encouraged through subtle rivalry that motivates them to excel in their divine roles. They compete to be the most convincing gods, the most devoted to their divine destiny, the most worthy of the honor of sacrifice. This competition prevents them from supporting each other's resistance to the conditioning process. The victims are gradually introduced to previous years' sacrifice ceremonies through carefully edited descriptions that emphasize the beauty and honor of the deaths, while downplaying the pain and horror. They're shown artistic depictions of sacrifice that present it as transcendent spiritual experience rather than ritual murder. Religious ecstasy becomes a regular part of their experience through dancing, chanting, and meditation practices that produce altered states of consciousness. These naturally occurring spiritual experiences are interpreted as evidence of their divine nature and their readiness for transformation through sacrifice. The final stage involves complete acceptance of their scheduled deaths. The victims actively participate in planning their own sacrifice ceremonies, choosing ritual elements, rehearsing their roles, and expressing eager anticipation for their transformation into true divinity. They become enthusiastic partners in their own execution. Family visits are carefully orchestrated to reinforce the conditioning. The victims' relatives are coached to express pride and honor about their family members' divine status, creating social pressure that supports the victim's new identity rather than challenging it. The manufacturing process produces victims who genuinely believe they are gods, who actively want to be sacrificed, and who participate willingly in elaborate ceremonies designed to kill them in the most public and dramatic ways possible. They've been so thoroughly conditioned that they see their execution as the fulfillment of their greatest spiritual ambitions. The success rate is remarkable. Nearly all victims who complete the full conditioning process go to their deaths willingly, many expressing gratitude to their captors for the opportunity to achieve divinity through sacrifice. The few who resist the conditioning are simply killed as ordinary sacrifices rather than as manufactured gods. Reading omens in entrails, prophecy through torture. The Aztecs developed the most sophisticated fortune-telling system in human history. They could predict the future by systematically torturing pregnant women to death and reading omens in the color of their amniotic fluid, the movement of their dying fetuses, and the patterns their blood made when it hit the stone floor. This wasn't random cruelty. This was scientific divination where specialist priests spent decades learning to interpret every scream, every convulsion, and every dying breath as messages from the gods about coming events. Different types of victims provided different categories of prophetic information. Warriors revealed military futures through their death struggles, while children offered insights into long-term cosmic cycles through the specific ways they died screaming. You're standing in the sacred chamber beneath the great temple where the priest-diviners practice their craft. This isn't a library or observatory. It's a combination torture chamber and medical facility where human beings are slowly killed while specialists interpret every aspect of their death for messages about the future. The victim brought forward today is a pregnant woman captured in recent raids, specifically chosen because her condition provides multiple opportunities for divine communication. The priests believe that unborn children exist partially in the spirit world and can therefore serve as messengers between the divine realm and mortal existence. The lead diviner explains the procedure as if he's conducting a medical lecture. The position of the fetus will tell us about the coming harvest. The color of the amniotic fluid reveals whether the next military campaign will succeed. The number of heartbeats before death indicates how many days until the next solar eclipse. The woman is conscious and aware as she's placed on the stone examination table. Keeping victims alert during divination is essential because their emotional state affects the quality of the prophetic information. Fear, pain, and desperation create spiritual conditions that make divine communication more clear and accurate. The first incision is made across her abdomen while she's still alive and conscious. The priests need to examine the fetus while it's still connected to the mother's life force, still receiving divine messages through her spiritual essence. The cutting is performed slowly and carefully to maintain both lives for as long as possible. As the abdominal cavity opens, the priests immediately begin their interpretation. The amount of blood that flows indicates the intensity of coming rains. The way internal organs move when exposed to air reveals the direction of future military threats. The color and texture of exposed tissue provides information about upcoming political changes. The fetus is extracted while still alive, its umbilical cord intact and pulsing. The diviners examine its position, its development stage, and its physical characteristics for prophetic meaning. A head-down position predicts victory in war. Unusual limb development suggests supernatural intervention in human affairs. The dying movements of both mother and child are carefully observed and recorded. The pattern of the woman's final convulsions maps out the agricultural growing season. The duration of the fetus's survival after extraction indicates how long the current political alliance will last. Every movement, every sound, every physiological response carries prophetic significance. Other forms of divination through torture are conducted simultaneously in different parts of the chamber. A young man is being slowly flayed while priests read the future in the pattern of his exposed nerve endings. An elderly woman is being methodically dismembered while diviners interpret the structure of her bones for messages about long-term cosmic cycles. The examination of internal organs requires extensive medical knowledge combined with sophisticated interpretation techniques. The liver's color and texture reveal information about coming diseases. The condition of the lungs indicates changes in trade relationships with distant cities. The heart size and beating pattern provides details about the emperor's health and longevity. Blood divination involves collecting victims' blood in special vessels and examining its behavior under various conditions. How quickly it coagulates indicates the timing of future events. The patterns it forms when mixed with sacred water reveal the nature of coming supernatural phenomena. The priests maintain detailed records of their divination sessions, correlating the interpretations with subsequent events to refine their techniques. They've developed extensive catalogs that connect specific torture responses with particular types of prophetic information, creating a systematic approach to extracting supernatural knowledge through human suffering. Different types of victims provide different categories of prophetic information. Warriors reveal military futures through their death struggles. Pregnant women provide agricultural and fertility predictions. Children offer insights into long-term cosmic cycles. Elderly victims give information about ancestral spirits and connections to the underworld. The timing of divination sessions is crucial for accuracy. Certain hours of the day produce clearer prophetic information than others. Specific calendar dates enhance the divine communication. Astronomical events, like eclipses or planetary alignments, create optimal conditions for extracting supernatural knowledge through torture. Specialized tools are used to enhance the divination process. Obsidian knives of different shapes create specific types of wounds that produce particular categories of prophetic information. Sacred containers collect different bodily fluids for separate analysis. Measuring instruments precisely record timing and positioning details that affect interpretation accuracy. The verification of prophetic accuracy is a crucial part of the system. Predictions are recorded in detail and compared with subsequent events to determine the effectiveness of different torture techniques. Successful methods are refined and expanded, while unsuccessful approaches are modified or abandoned. The most experienced diviners develop specialized expertise in particular types of prophetic information. Some become experts in military predictions extracted through warrior sacrifice. Others specialize in agricultural forecasting using pregnant women and children. A few master the complex art of reading cosmic cycles through the torture of elderly victims. The integration of divination with other aspects of Aztec religion creates a comprehensive system where human sacrifice serves multiple purposes simultaneously. The same torture session that provides prophetic information also feeds the gods, demonstrates imperial power, and reinforces social hierarchies through spectacular displays of control violence. Major political and military decisions are based on information extracted through human sacrifice, making the torture divination system essential to state planning. Resources are allocated, campaigns are launched, and policies are implemented based on messages interpreted from dying victims' final moments. When Spanish conquistadors encounter Aztec divination practices, they're simultaneously horrified by the systematic torture and impressed by the sophisticated interpretation techniques involved. They recognize the intellectual complexity of the system while being appalled by its fundamental reliance on human suffering for supernatural communication. The legacy of torture-based prophecy influences other aspects of Aztec science and medicine. Priests conducting divination develop detailed knowledge of human anatomy that advances surgical techniques, understand drug effects that improve medical treatments, and create observational methods that enhance other forms of research. The final bloodbath, when the killing finally stopped. It's 1521, and the most sophisticated murder machine in human history is eating itself alive. As Spanish conquistadors siege Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs respond not with military strategy, but with frenzied escalation of human sacrifice, killing thousands of their own people daily in desperate attempts to feed gods who no longer answer. The final months of the empire become a religious feeding frenzy where priests work in shifts to process victims. Citizens volunteer their children for sacrifice, and the last emperor personally cuts hearts from chests while his city burns around him. This is the ultimate death spiral of a civilization that built itself on blood, consuming its own population in a final orgy of sacrifice, while the conquistadors watch in horrified fascination as their enemies commit systematic suicide in the name of gods who have already lost the war. The siege has lasted months. Spanish conquistadors and their indigenous allies have surrounded the city, cutting off food supplies, destroying the aqueducts, and systematically demolishing the magnificent causeways that connect the island capital to the mainland. But the Aztec response isn't surrender or negotiation. It's escalation of sacrifice to unprecedented levels. Emperor Cuauhtémoc stands atop the pyramid. His ceremonial robes is soaked with the blood of the morning's offerings. 50 hearts have already been extracted today. Their still beating essence offered to gods who seem increasingly distant. The priests work in rotation now, their arms exhausted from constant killing, their obsidian blades dulled from cutting through so many chests. The Spanish watch from their positions around the plaza, horrified and fascinated by the industrial-scale murder happening before their eyes. Cortés himself observes through a spyglass, counting the bodies that tumbled down the pyramid steps, calculating how many Aztec warriors are being consumed by their own religious frenzy rather than fighting his siege. But this isn't mindless panic. It's calculated desperation. The priests have consulted their most sacred texts and determined that the cosmic crisis requires unprecedented sacrifice. If the gods are allowing these strangers to devastate the empire, it can only mean that previous offerings have been insufficient. The solution is obvious. More death, more blood, more hearts offered with greater frequency and intensity. The victim selection has become increasingly desperate. Where once only perfect specimens were chosen for sacrifice, now anyone available is dragged to the altars. Children, elderly, sick, wounded warriors. Anyone whose heart still beats can potentially appease the angry gods and restore cosmic balance. The priests have developed new efficiency techniques to process the increased number of victims. Multiple altars operate simultaneously, each staffed with teams trained to perform heart extractions in under 90 seconds. The pyramid steps run red with continuous streams of blood that never dry between sacrifices. Spanish chronicler Bernal Diaz del Castillo records the sound echoing across the city. Not just the screams of individual victims, but a constant wailing that rises from the temple complex like the voice of the city itself, crying out in supernatural agony. The drums beat without stopping. The conch shell trumpets shriek endlessly. And underneath it all, the wet sounds of obsidian cutting through flesh. The most horrifying aspect is the victims' cooperation. Many of those being sacrificed are volunteers, citizens who genuinely believe that offering their lives might save their civilization. Families bring their children forward, elderly priests offer themselves for sacrifice, and wounded warriors crawl up the pyramid steps to die for gods who no longer seem to care. The Spanish describe piles of human heads stacked like cordwood around the temple base, hearts arranged in ceremonial patterns, and blood pooled so deep it reflects the sky like dark mirrors. The smell becomes overwhelming. Not just the metallic scent of fresh blood, but the sweet stench of decomposition from bodies that can't be processed quickly enough. Cuauhtémoc himself participates in the sacrifices, his royal hands cutting hearts from chests while he prays desperately for divine intervention. The emperor, who should be organizing military resistance, instead spends his time feeding gods who refuse to act, convinced that sufficient sacrifice will eventually restore the cosmic order that made Aztec dominance possible. The psychological breakdown of the priesthood becomes evident as some begin sacrificing themselves. Unable to extract divine response despite unprecedented offerings, they conclude that they themselves must be offered to demonstrate the sincerity of their desperation. Master priests who have served for decades cut their own throats while assistants extract their hearts for divine consumption. Spanish soldiers report that the pyramid steps become so slippery with blood that priests can barely climb them. Bodies pile up faster than they can be removed, creating obstacles that interfere with the sacrifice ceremonies. The Aztecs construct wooden ramps over the corpse piles to maintain access to the altars. The city's population begins to thin noticeably as more citizens volunteer for sacrifice. Markets close because vendors have offered themselves to the gods. Craftsmen abandon their workshops to seek death on the altars. Families disappear entirely as parents sacrifice children and then offer themselves for execution. Cannibalistic consumption of sacrificial victims reaches epidemic proportions as the siege creates food shortages. The nobility feast on the flesh of sacrificed commoners while the remaining population grows increasingly desperate for both supernatural intervention and basic nutrition. The final weeks bring complete religious breakdown. Priests begin sacrificing anyone they can catch, abandoning traditional victim selection criteria in favor of pure volume. Citizens hide in their homes, afraid to venture outside, where they might be grabbed for immediate sacrifice by religious fanatics convinced that one more heart might save the empire. The Spanish described the final assault on the temple complex through streets ankle-deep in human blood, over bridges built from piled corpses, past walls decorated with severed heads arranged in artistic patterns. The defenders aren't fighting with weapons. They're fighting with religious fury, convinced that their deaths in battle will join the sacrifice victims in appeasing the gods. The last priest stands atop the burning temple with his obsidian blade raised toward heaven, calling to gods who no longer answer. Below him, Spanish soldiers methodically destroy the carved representations of deities that have demanded centuries of human sacrifice. The cosmic order that required constant murder is being demolished by men who worship a god who died only once. As the blade falls toward the priest's own chest, he's performing the final sacrifice of Aztec civilization, offering himself to gods who have already been replaced by a deity that Spanish missionaries claim requires no human blood. The heart that emerges from his chest is the last one that will ever be offered to Tezcatlipoca, Huitzilopochtli, or any of the hungry gods who built an empire on systematic murder. The Spanish find the temple complex filled with the evidence of accelerated sacrifice. Thousands of recently killed bodies, altars still warm with blood, obsidian blades worn thin from constant use. The infrastructure of industrial murder that took centuries to develop has been destroyed in a single siege, its techniques lost, its practitioners dead. Cortés orders the temple destroyed stone by stone, each block carrying the stains of human sacrifice that will never completely wash away. Where the Great Pyramid stood, Spanish architects will build a cathedral whose altar requires only bread and wine, replacing the cosmic hunger for human hearts with symbolic consumption that satisfies a god who died willingly rather than demanding others die for him. The survivors of Tenochtitlan's fall wander through the ruins of their city, stepping over the remains of neighbors who offered themselves to gods that proved powerless against Spanish steel and smallpox. The magnificent civilization that created art, architecture, and poetry is ending not with noble defeat, but with religious suicide, consumed by its own appetite for sacrifice. Within a generation, the children of Aztec nobles will worship in Spanish churches, their memories of human sacrifice fading into half-remembered nightmares. The calendar of killing will be replaced by Christian festivals celebrating a god who conquered death rather than feeding on it. The final irony is complete. The civilization that believed human sacrifice was necessary to keep the sun moving across the sky discovers that the sun continues its journey even after the killing stops. The cosmic maintenance that required countless deaths proves unnecessary. The gods that demanded constant feeding fade into silence, and the world continues to exist without the blood that once seemed essential to its survival. The last of the sacred obsidian blades are melted down by Spanish smiths and turned into tools for building rather than implements for killing. The final chapter of human sacrifice in the Americas ends not with cosmic catastrophe, but with simple replacement. A hungry god system dying of starvation when its human feeding machine is destroyed by believers in a god who asks for worship rather than murder. The pyramid steps that once echoed with the screams of sacrifice victims now echo only with the footsteps of Spanish soldiers and indigenous survivors walking through the ruins of a civilization that fed its gods with human hearts until there were no hearts left to offer.